Hello and welcome. And we are going to be talking today about what's new in the latest version of Dragonbond Battles of Valerna. I believe we've had a few changes since the last Kickstarter and sort of been streamlining and creating new content and units and all that fun stuff. So we thought we'd have a bit of a chat and keep you up to date.
Yeah, it's been quite a few months of playtesting, developing, games development at its best. So tried a lot of games, written up bits, tried them on. Some made it, some didn't make it. But where we are now is, we think, a really cool place. We've done, yes, so like you were saying, that the main changes that happened between the last version you guys have seen and this new version. We'll go through those and we'll explain the reasoning behind it and how we got there. So, for example,
Alessio, what's new in the rules?
what's in the rules? Yeah, I think to begin with, if you remember in the previous version, you could, when you finish preparing your army, you could have a few points left spare to spend, and the solution at the time was to have just upgrade tokens, which was a reroll. You could buy a reroll for 10 points, and that would just allow you to finish off the round number of your army. But we thought, well, actually, we could do something a bit more interesting, sophisticated than that. And so artifacts were born. And though the cost is just the same, they all have different powers, different abilities that you can give to your heroes. For examples of this, would you like us to?
So they sort of work alongside spell cards, Valor cards, and but these are more of a sort of passive effect on a hero. So, for example, you might have a suit of Cloudthorn Mail, which will give your hero, after this hero survives a melee attack, deal 1 wound to the attacking unit. So on certain heroes, sort of an Ogron or someone sort of very strong and able to take a few sort of hits, you can deal a bit of damage back, make yourself less vulnerable to sort of the melee enemies. And there's a fair few of these, even one that I think the morale of, so one thing that's sort of come up is when a general dies or is defeated, then basically everyone nearby has to take a morale check, might flee the battlefield, which is quite a sort of detriment, and it's sort of an incentive to make your general the most sort of physically capable warrior in your army.
Yes, and we made sure that the bonus that the general confers to the units around him or her would also be the same range as where the morale is triggered, where the panic is triggered if the general is killed. So you have it's an interesting act of, I want the bonus, but if I had the bonus, then I'm risking losing. Yeah, so there's a double-edged sword there.
Yeah, and so and one of the artifacts essentially is a way of sort of nullifying that negative. So that's the Martyr's Horn. So there's tons of these artifacts that will be spread out amongst. Oh, that's a spell. That will be spread out amongst the releases for you to sort of customize your heroes.
Yes, and the item I really like is the standard that allows you to add a dice or subtract a dice when you're rolling for initiative, which is really
the battle standard.
The battle standard, which is basically very useful because sometimes you want to go first and you want to try to make sure as much as possible to go first. Sometimes you want to actually see what the opponent does first. So that allows you to modulate that, which is, I think, it's a must have in my opinion.
So it gives you a bit more flexibility and able to sort of modify your heroes.
Artifacts are a great way to tailor your heroes, your army, and indeed also you use them to bluff, because some items may be a bit dangerous, and you can try to go maybe with a weaker hero. You can try to challenge really powerful units, etc. They may assume that you have a dangerous flashback. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're bluffing. So an interesting element to the game.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about neutral units, how they work in the game?
Yeah, this was something that came out of the tribes, isn't it? Where there's a lot of models, some of the models are used in roleplay games, in the roleplay game, and we basically thought, okay, some of these could be used in the war game as well. And basically, the idea is we created a category called neutral unit. in the neutral unit category, there are two separate types of these. One is mercenaries, and one is monsters. Mercenaries, very simply, are units belonging to different armies that maybe have not been fully developed yet, and it will be, or creatures, well, most of the mercenaries would be actually belonging to other armies. Yeah. So it's a way of adding creatures, troops from other armies into your normal Valerian army. So basically, examples of these could be the Obakar. I think they're a great example. The Obakar tribes have these powerful warriors, and there's several different units. Some of them are really scary.
Yeah, so there's heroes, there's sort of epic creatures, there's bands of units. They're essentially neutral units that can be sort of put into any army, which is useful for sort of filling in places where your army might be deficient or weaker. Sort of bring in some mercenaries from a distant land to bolster them. But I think the more exciting bit is the monsters. So there are also neutral monsters, which are not something you add into your army. It's something you add to a scenario. So you might say we're playing the normal sort of pitched battle scenario, but we're going to add in a Hydra into this game. And you place the Hydra onto the board. There's a card that tells you how it all sets up, and you create a behavior deck, sort of AI deck, for the monster, which tells you how it plays during the game. So with a Hydra, it's going to regenerate a lot of health. It's going to charge your units. It's going to get sort of stuck in melee. Whereas something like the Wado, which is a mind controlling sort of genie fella, is going to sort of stay back. It's going to sort of mind control your units and sort of sow chaos and destruction among your forces. They're not all bad though. They also add points into the game. So by killing monsters or fighting against them for a long time, you gain sort of trophy points, which are equal to they give you objective points, and that's sort of another avenue for you to win the game. But of course, at the risk of losing your units and getting slaughtered.
I mean, some of these are very straightforward. The passive monster, the Chimera, that basically just in general attacks a random unit around it. There's the behavior deck that tells you how each monster behaves, and some of that, but sort of an AI system, kind of a simple AI system. And so they tend to they range from the simple ones that have straightforward rules to actually very, very wacky ones with very, very interesting rules. Where, for example, I think the sandworms for me are the storm wound are the most interesting ones, where basically they dive under the surface of the table and pop up if you move around, and so it's it creates a kind of a mini game.
So there's those, and then there is also the sort of intelligent monsters, sort of ancient wizards who may or may not be sort of working with or against you, but they can be bribed. So the way those ones work is essentially they're not random. But at the start of each round, each player sort of bids for their control, and you bid with victory points. So basically, I say at this point in time, this sort of mercenary, this ancient wizard, is worth to me 5 victory points. If I controlled him for this round, I reckon I could take that point and gain 10 victory points. So that's worth it for me. Whereas for you, you might go, it's worth 7 victory points. So you're going to take control of him because he's in my back lines, and you're going to do some horrible stuff, maybe try and get my general. So sort of each round, you've got this wavering alliance where you're both bidding the victory points, and the person who wins loses those victory points, but they gain control with that hero for the round. So a very different dynamic to the sort of chaotic, random nature of the monsters, and it becomes sort of this section in each game where you're both basically trying to evaluate board state and work out whether it's worth it, whether it's worth the money.
Yeah, some of them actually don't take just points; they take lives, depending on what their nature is. So you can bribe them with anything.
Lives and spells and all that wonderful stuff. So neutral units are an absolutely huge sort of new section to the game that adds a lot of variety, a lot of replayability, and a lot of weirdness.
Indeed. And another way of customizing your your armies would be through spells or other Valor cards. We have several decks of these mini decks that belong to each of the races. So there will be an Alarian deck, which obviously would be about buffing units, hailing units, movement, so more subtle. While the
teleport in there.
And the Targaryen are obviously kind of defeating enemies, and it's all blood magic. So it's kind of, there's definitely an evil tinge to them. These Valiants are all about honor and making it stronger and healing again. And there's the Nawak, the power of nature there. The card spells for the Nawak.
Yeah, there's a spell in there that actually lets you sort of take a piece of terrain and just move it. So, because the Nawak, a lot of their units have fieldcraft, and the ones that don't pretty much have flying. So terrain is really not a problem for them, whereas it's obviously a problem for their enemies. So quite often it's useful to, if that forest was just there, that would be much better for me. Well, I have a spell for that. So the way the Valor cards work is you have a hand of them that they cost points at the beginning of the when you're making your army, and to use a Valor card, they're all sort of reaction spells. So they'll say on the spell, play instead of making a Valor attack with a Dreamcaster unit, for example. And so you play that when the trigger allows, and you do the thing that it says on the tin. Most of them, if not, I think all of them actually, are based off of being within range of a Valor unit, which is a unit that has a Valor keyword on its ranged attack, or a specific sort of spellcasting unit. So the Alarian cards need sort of Dreamcasters to cast their specific spells. There are also sort of generic spells that any sorcerer can cast. So essentially, these are a hand of really powerful action cards that are limited sort of in their effect by their proximity to your spellcasters. So if the enemy is able to sort of knock out your spellcasters, which is often your generals or your heroes, then they'll be able to sort of control the battle with by sort of nullifying your use of these action cards.
I think what's interesting is that differently from the artifacts remain with the hero that is carrying them. These you can have multiples of, while artifacts can only have one, but these are one use only. So you have to choose in the battle what's the timing, what's the best use, the best moments to unleash your magic.
But they're also shared amongst all of your wizards. So sort of you have a hand of cards, and it could be this sort of group of wizards over here that cast it, or it could be your general over here, depending on which is most useful. There's some really fun stuff in there that was actually surprisingly one of the most fun ones, or it was surprising when we sort of wrote it, is stuff like Burst of Speed, and there's one that sort of really breaks someone else's charge when they charge you, and those ones just add a bit of uncertainty when making those sort of calculations in the game. So, you go, I've got a speed of 8 and I'm 14 away from the enemy, therefore, there's no way that he can get to me in that time. Whereas this sort of adds that little bit of maybe he has or they have the Burst of Speed card, and they are able to add an extra 3 inches onto their charge and get in. So yeah, they add a sort of much needed little bit of uncertainty and bluffing into the game.
I like the chain lightning effect, where you're thinking you're out of range, but the enemy is in range of another unit of yours, and they uses that unit to hit them and then arc onto you again. So it can extend effectively the range. You thought you were safe, you are.
I think chain lightning is one of those spells that is every time it's been nerfed and nerfed and nerfed. Every single time it's come out. It used to hit 3 different units, now it's 2. It used to have 12-inch range, now it's 6. So yeah, it's sort of it's one of those cards that we want to keep it. It's still one that gets pitched quite a lot because it basically doubles an attack. But it's situational now, and definitely it feels good when it goes off.
It does, and you're right. This is a classic example of development. You design these, then you try them, and obviously you start tweaking them until you're happy with them.
So speaking of development, a bit more of the sort of nitty gritty now, I think. Why don't you tell us how we streamlined multiple combat?
Yes. Yeah, well, it was interesting because we were finding that the more we play tested, the more big combat involving several units on each side. Predictably, I suppose, the rules were, previous was special rules that applied in some situations, but when the combat is becoming a huge thing with, 3 units on this side and 2 units on that side, and this unit is engaged with that, this unit is engaged with 2, so it became heavier. We started to add things to the rules to try to cope with this situation. So we said, if this happens, then you do this. So we started to add layers of kind of detail of the rules, which made them bigger and heavier and more detailed and stuff. Such sentences got fairly long and convoluted. So that's the point when I went, okay, I think we need to, instead of keep adding stuff to try to catch all possible combos or situations, let's simplify. Let's radically come to a solution where a lot of this goes away. And the game is still, very easy, if anything, even more interesting from a tactical point of view. So we basically decided that there could never be a multiple fight where both sides are outflanking the enemy and then being flanked by the enemy. We made it so that one side can have more than one unit fighting, but the other side will have one. So the situation is when there's a unit flanking and you charge that unit, the flanking unit is actually taken away from the fight where they were flanking, so that it becomes a separate combat. Which is adds that nice thing where you kind of going to the rescue of your unit. So you're generally surrounded by many enemies, you charge, and by charging one of the units that is surrounding your general, you drive them away from your general. It's like, fight me, don't fight. So there's a nice dynamic, there's a nice interesting dynamic there, and of course both interesting in game terms, but also much simpler to write, much simpler to read, simpler game, and interesting. So that seemed to work fine. So it was but you're right, I think it was one of the core development that we did to the system of Liverpool also.
So the next one. Next on we have the merging of captains and heroes features.
Yes, well, that one, we did try several solutions for the captains. Used to be part of the unit.
So they used to essentially be a card that kind of gave a special ability to a unit, rather than being sort of, and they did have a model, but they didn't have their own stats and they didn't have their own the flavor and feeling. They just sort of conferred this special ability onto the unit, and maybe it had a special ability when they were sacrificed. Now they are their own units. We've essentially used, so we had heroes before, but they were sort of only grand sort of general level heroes, sort of your great heroes. Whereas now there's sort of these minor sort of captain level heroes, which are essentially a bit stronger than units, but they're only a single model, so they're much more fragile, and they still have those special abilities, but they're essentially, if they're next to their unit that they have in command, they confer those abilities onto the unit, and it sort of just simplifies a lot of that sort of mechanics and makes it more interesting to be able to snipe out a captain or try and sort of take out the enemy heroes, and allows them to do a bit of splitting up, so you can have the sort of like the hero cack the point, stay on the objective, whilst the unit sort of pushes on and tries to sort of forge ahead. And so it gives a really sort of another sort of simple solution that sort of cuts out quite a lot of unnecessary complication.
Yeah, that's simpler, but also again better in terms of, at least in my opinion, in terms of how they play. The fact that you start the game with your unit only nice in range, in command of your heroes, and you're thinking, okay, I'm supporting these units, working with them, and then of course nothing survives contact with the enemy, and suddenly your plan has to change, and you have to adapt and go, right, okay, maybe I want to support these guys, I move closer to these other guys, I can help them, or like you were saying, I can go and grab the objective. So it's interesting that it's more flexible, and you want to be close to your unit, but there's no mechanical rules that force you to do that. So it's a choice rather than a set of things you can and cannot do. Just if you're good, if you're close to them, they get the benefit, you get the benefit. If you're not, then of course that doesn't happen. But of course, then allow you to have 2 units doing 2 different jobs, which is power itself. also using the captain and or the hero and the unit in combo in tandem, because you can activate them at the same time, which gives you effectively 2 activations in a single blip, which is useful, very useful. For example, useful in terms of flanking a unit. So if you both charge, then you're actually flanking the unit, which is again a powerful combo that will be introduced.
On our next subject then.
So a minor change with the pitched battle. So rather than sort of having sort of 3 weaker scenarios in the 3 or 4 in the back of the book, there's now sort of 1 suggested strong scenario. That's the pitched battle, which is definitely the best of those 3. Tweaked and modified a bit, and basically the other scenarios are still there, but they are basically alternate rather than the main thing. So they're not sort of presented as equal choices. Basically, they are alternative scenarios to play, which are fun. But the main sort of balance is around that pitched battle, which is basically capturing points. It's destroying enemy units. Those are sort of the main things that give you points, plus the most points at the end of 4 rounds, if it gets that far. Once you get, I guess there's a wipeout before then.
Yes, I think with pitched battle, we were finding that it was the one we enjoyed the most, and the one we kind of wanted to play, and occasionally, of course, we want to try something completely different. And that's where you decide, okay, let's play in one where only the objectives count, or only the key unit count, or indeed throw a monster in there and play a monster-related scenario. So there's also different ways to enjoy the game, but we also like the idea that we tended to play pitched battles naturally. It felt like the natural way to play the game. So we said, okay, this is the normal way to play the game. And of course, you can choose to do all of the other things as to change it. And I guess and one important thing that we found was that we made all these changes, and therefore, particularly splitting the heroes from their unit, we kind of had to tweak again our algorithms for the point values calculations, and that was an interesting exercise. We went through several different iterations of how to approach that, and but one thing that came as we also at the same time, because we were writing scenarios for the battle report, for the starter set, for the Kickstarter. So we were writing a lot of scenarios, and some of the scenarios were played with smaller amount of units, a full 100-point battle. So 50 points seemed to be a thing that features a lot of scenarios. We played those with the point values, the input values, and what did we find?
Well, we made a few tweaks to basically make those scenarios so more engaging, especially with heroes allowed. So with the old sort of system, your units and things were your smallest sort of unit of currency, if that makes sense. Whereas with the addition of heroes, you can go down a bit smaller. So if you're trying to sort of get to 50 points, then that can be 2 or 3 units of a small hero, or it could be 2 units of a great hero, or 2 or 3 heroes. So it sort of allows a bit more sort of variability in those 50 points, which make that a more interesting sort of way to build your army for 50 points. So with those changes, we found that the 50 points sort of works as well as, if not better than, the sort of 100 point sort of massive games. Certainly leads to sort of shorter scenarios. Does mean that it's harder to fit a full size dragon in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it creates this sort of smaller but no less sort of choices in those scenarios.
Yeah. So it makes a very good game that lasts a couple of hours, isn't it? Is that if you don't have like an entire afternoon or evening, if you don't have as much time as to play a 100-point game, you can play a 50-point, which is faster and no less interesting, like you were saying. It's actually quite challenging, and in effect, I found that personally, because you have fewer units, they seem to matter more. You care for them a lot, and you oh my god, I only have 3 units, so I have to be really careful what I do. So it's different, but it certainly is a good game still. I think, the 50 points one, I really grew up to like it a lot.
And I think that's
Yeah, so I believe you might have the rulebook available in PDF. So if you do, check that out. See if you can spot the changes that have been made, and give it a go, give it a play, and have fun.